Hello, this is Arjun Kwasnikov. I'm an artist and I am the creator of this written system, which this little short video series is going to be about, like an explainer, kind of how to, but also a little bit about some of its development, its cultural influences, and kind of how to do it piece by piece. It is called Delzhi in 44 letters because I want to separate this out into 44 parts for a couple reasons. There are 44 letters in this alphabet, and also I tend to talk a lot, and I want to challenge myself to kind of break up a lot of my very lengthy and complicated thoughts and insights about this project and its development and my experience and the whole entirety of cultural history and humankind's obsession with writing as a whole. So I'm going to try to condense that down into digestible pieces. So the short description is Delzhi is an alphabet I developed for my tribal nation's historic native language, which has died out a couple hundred years ago. It was a variant of the Dena'ina language, which was prominent in the south central / Cook Inlet region of modern Alaska, and where I am, kind of on the southern Kenai Peninsula in the Nichil Nation, also the modern Ninilchik tribe, just a different name. Our tribe and a couple of the others nearby, we were kind of the first ones who completely lost the language altogether. Luckily, so much survives of what we know about it through the study and history of some of the survivors who do speak the Dena'ina language in some of our neighboring tribes and dialects. And even though there's a whole bunch of differences that are documented and not, because it was very much a salvage type of recording in the 20th century that led to a lot of modern Dena'ina study, we can still learn so much through that study of other dialects. And what I love doing is comparing what has been studied and written and published and either academic or not, and comparing it to our local history and knowledge and I guess oral tradition, even though oral tradition is kind of a heavy term for me, I would just say folk knowledge, because our own culture and identity is so unique and blended and mixed that it's not entirely true to say that word Dena'ina, and that is one of the reasons I'm such a proponent of using the word Nichil, which is very specific to our own nation and our own distinct history, and it embraces kind of a unique aspect of our geography, which is the name, which derives from a river and a type of birch tree, and it's very specific, and it just lets people know that, yes, maybe historically we were in the Proto-Dena'ina group, but this is who we are now. And that's one of the reasons I created this alphabet. I wanted to take all the sounds of the language, the old language, and give them their own visual presence, because I think having a visual presence for a language is such a potent thing to have. And I feel, at least in my experience in growing up, that a language, when it has its own visual identity, it's so much more, you can really grasp the idea that, yes, to learn another language, you have to change your mind, because there's nothing more mind-changing than encountering a different writing system and trying to learn it. Learning language, using Latin letters like we do in most of our modern languages, it's not easy, but it's aided by the fact that most modern languages, and actually most languages in the world, if not all, have some system of using our basic Latin alphabet. That's where we get our English A, B, C, so on. Because we can see those letters, we can kind of guess what those letters sort of mean. And if all these languages have similar letters, we can kind of guess if there's a related language, it might have a common root or something like that. But I'll get into more of that later. So having this distinct visual presence and having to learn another written system, as well as speaking and writing and thinking, was really evocative to me. And so I sat down one day about 10 years ago now and kind of over the period of half a year came up with 44 distinct letters that are kind of based on conceptual symbols for each of the 44 phonetic letters in the Dena'ina alphabet. And that's why this series is called Delzhi in 44 letters. Delzhi being the name of the alphabet, it wasn't its original one. I'll talk about that at some other point. But so this is just a sample of some letter forms that I work on. I do love using copper ink, and I'm going to use copper ink for my demonstration, just because it's so iconic with at least the northwestern part of the Americas. And I just love the way it looks. It looks beautiful on white. It looks great on black too, like this little card I made. But I do prefer the white. There's just something about seeing this warm print that has just this subtle glow. And I think doing it in copper is fun. Of course, I use pens, paper, pencils, whatever. They're just letters. But for my artistic use, I love doing copper. That's been like the last couple of years my very favorite thing to do. So I prepared an inkstone already. I have some examples to refer to. Let's learn about the first letter. The first letter is called Del, which is shaped a bit like our modern number 9. My inkstone is fabulously messy, so please ignore it if this bothers you. I always believe even the nicest of writing and art materials, they're meant to be used, so I'm not afraid of wearing them out or getting them messy. So let's just go over here. And I apologize, I'm using my phone. I don't intend to have a fancy setup because I want this to be more like a diary. And, less fuss, more comfort for me. It's okay. Here's the letter Del, and it looks like just a fancy number 9. It's a loop that goes up as you get to the left side, farther away, and then back down. Now, there is a lowercase form too, and I haven't fully fleshed out lowercase yet. The great thing about this writing is it's still evolving. Like, I'm still noticing these subtle changes in the way that I use it, and like reducing the number of strokes in certain letters for just speed and convenience. It's been a really interesting evolution. And when I get to some of the other letters that have had some pretty wild evolutions, I will talk about them. And as you can see there, the lowercase form of Del is just a basic candy cane shape, more or less. And so letter Del represents a drumstick, which is a traditional spruce root drumstick. Spruce root's a very endemic material used historically in this area. It's a root that has been pulled together into a loop and let to dry and tied off this way. And this is the part here on this left side here that would actually hit a drum. And drums are important to not just this tribe historically, but of course, many, if not all, of North America. They represent communication, music, time, any number of things that you can associate with them. It's a tradition that hasn't been a part of our culture in quite a long time, along with our original language has kind of gone many generations ago, but it is still important as a symbol. And I love communicating about culture through symbology. I think that's very important. So the letter del, it actually doesn't have a very common sound that we have in English. It's a glottal stop. And for people who aren't aware with linguistic symbols, a glottal stop we would normally write with an apostrophe, and they exist mostly in loanwords. And the most common loanword that we have in American English is the name of the islands of Hawaii. And as you can see here, here's Hawaii in my very bad chicken scratch. And there's a glottal stop. It's that apostrophe you'll see between the two I's. And that lets you know that these two vowel sounds, the I and E, are separate. But it's there because it's still, even though it is a type of a pause, it's still an utterance that's connecting this word together. So you say Hawaii, and it lets you know these two I's are vocalized differently. We know that this I is vocalized by this A. It makes kind of a little bit of a diphthong, I, and we know that that's just E, so it's I-E. Because in some cases, if you don't have this glottal stop, it'll blend together, and you'll end up, maybe unintentionally, somebody will read it and think it's I, or whatever it is. So this apostrophe is actually very important, and for many Hawaiians, it represents being Hawaiian itself. This apostrophe, and just having it appear in writing is this important symbol for themselves. And we do have it in I call it Nichil Denina because just out of respect for my area and my work being about a variant. But we don't know for a fact if the Kachemak area, which is where we are, had its own dialect or not. We just know about it through context, through other neighbors. But there is a word called tuyu'u, which means float. And this is it written. And I like to write this bottom up and in lines right to left, just as a style choice. Right to left because I'm left-handed, but the letters bottom up also because of trees and roots, because that's kind of how our landscape is dominated. It's dominated by these tree forms. So this is a word for a float, which is tu-u, glottal stop, letter del, u. And that separates these two sounds. It lets you know u is separated from u. So u, u. Even though they are kind of the same, just because the u sound is represented by this shape here, this one is being shaped by this kind of a Y sound here. So it's its own sound. So really the glottal stop may not be a letter in the vocalized sense, but it is a letter in the sense of syntax or the logic that we have when we speak. So we know that when somebody says tuyu'u, they mean float. And that if somebody is not using this for some reason and they just say tuyu, that might mean something else. Who knows? It's hard to say. Well, that's about it for the first letter. I can't really think of anything else that would go along with this. Like I said, this is going to be a series in 44 parts, and we'll eventually go through every letter in this 44-letter system. And I hope that you will join me for that. This kind of more of a diary-style personal production at home at my table kind of a project. And if you have been watching to this point, thank you very much, and I hope you will continue in part 2. Thank you.